the rehab prescription, which was launched about 11 years ago now by the NHS Clinical Advisory Group on Trauma. And very sensibly, they recommended that every person with a major trauma, so not just brain injury, should receive high quality rehabilitation. That's unarguable. Hopefully no one will dispute that. But of course, in the NHS, people do receive some early rehabilitation, but sadly, because of the constraints on the NHS, and more particularly recently with COVID, of course, people after serious trauma are often moved on from the acute setting quite quickly, either to home, sometimes inappropriately, or to often private neurorehab facilities around the country, not often to NHS rehab facilities, except in those first few weeks. So all patients, and that can be a complicated journey. So it's very useful and very sensible if people going through that journey are able to take with them, if you like, a rehab prescription, where someone in the acute phase has determined what their rehabilitation needs may be through the coming months and in the longer term. And that document that is meant to be given to all those involved, including the patient, should have their rehabilitation needs on it and properly documented. Just like a prescription you take home for your medicines when you go home from hospital, exactly the same, very simple, very sensible concept that people would take their rehabilitation prescription plus their medical drug prescription as required. So the rehab prescription, it says there, gives patients and everyone involved in their care a comprehensive overview of immediate and more particularly longer term rehabilitation, neurorehabilitation requirements. It acts as a guide to navigate for them the complexity of the disability, which often can be very confusing and very complicated, sometimes involving a whole range of different people and specialists and in a range of different settings. So having one document that everyone can contribute to guide people through that is a great idea. I don't think anyone would doubt that. There are actually, may not know, there are two types of prescription. The standard prescription, as it's called, which is designed for lower level rehab requirements. I don't mean that rudely to the patients involved, because these people can still have significant disruptive trauma with major disruptions to their quality of life and their standard of life. But there's a specialist rehab prescription for those with the more complicated end of the spectrum, more complex needs. And that specialist prescription will apply usually to anyone with the level 1 and 2 inpatient rehabilitation. So that's right at the most complicated end, those people that need highly specialist multidisciplinary input. And that prescription has to be completed by a consultant in rehabilitation medicine, whereas the standard rehab prescription need not to be done by the senior doctor. So there's two prescriptions, and we can talk about both tonight. I think we'll probably be focusing on the specialist one, but not exclusively. So this very briefly is, what does it involve? Well, basically it's just a description of what happened and what the impairments and the disability and the handicap is, but both in a descriptive free text, but also in terms of properly categorized scales. And the scales used are the rehabilitation complexity scale, extended trauma version, a categorization tool, putting people in categories A, B, C, or D according to the complexity, the service level they require, which I'm sure is familiar to all of you, from very complicated level 1 services to less complicated 2A, 2B, and down to 3. And it will provide other key information for the person going along that route, such as their own wishes and their family's wishes and any potential barriers to discharge, whether they've got family, whether they live in a flat or a bungalow, whether it's accessible or not accessible, etc., etc. And without going through that bullet point list on the right, it will include, of course, what's initially, what sort of therapy looks to be required, whether it be physio or speech and language, or occupational therapy. Anything else that's physically important, such as continence and wound management, whether it's PEG tube and other nutritional supplementation, whether it's a catheter, but also, of course, other physical requirements such as orthoses and prostheses, medication, but as importantly, psychological and social needs, psychology reports, perhaps on your psychology reports, and any view of people as they go through the process of any external help they need, such as environmental controls and assistive technology, wheelchairs, mobility devices, etc. So for those of you in rehabilitation medicine, it's really a full comprehensive assessment that is put down on paper. It can be adjusted, of course. It's not set on day one. it will be adjusted as the person goes through that rehabilitation journey, no matter how long it lasts. That, at least, is the theory. Now, big question is, 11 years later from its launch, and as I said earlier, I think it's a great idea and should be widely adopted, but the question for the panel and for the audience is, has it been widely adopted? Is it of any use to anybody? In the sense of, is it being properly used? Does it actually make a difference to people's lives and well-being? Because if it doesn't, it's no good. What it's designed to do is to help those people through that journey. So that's a very brief introduction to remind people of what the rehab prescription is and should be, but is it used? Has it been used well? Is it helpful? Let's ask our panel. So I'm now going to put this slide up, and I presume the order is going to be from Tom Bolchin. He's going to introduce himself, but he is director of the Arnie Institute and Charity. Hockman Wong, a senior solicitor at Bolt, Burton and Kemp, and Sarah Grimshaw, who's a clinical specialist OT from Rehabilitate Therapy Limited. So that's all I'm going to say about them, because they can introduce themselves and say what their view of the rehabilitation prescription is from their own particular perspective. So I shall, and when they finish their three speeches, then we'll all take part in a Q&A function. And as Kate has said already, please put your questions in the Q&A. We can then see them on the screen, and I can direct those questions to the panel members. So please have your say. And at that point, I'm going to stop sharing this screen and pass first to Tom to introduce himself and to give his thoughts about the rehab prescription. So I'll pass back to you, Tom, please.
Mike, thank you so much. And thank you everyone for coming along today. It's a little bit of a late one, but we thank you so much. And Mike, thank you. And all the administrators behind the scenes. You make it, the kind of things what they are. This is, I think, the first one of these. Is that all right, Mike?
I believe it is. Yes, yes, that's right. So we hope we'll put more of these on different aspects of neurorehabilitation over the coming months. Yes, thanks, Tom.
I'm Tom Bolchin, and I run Arnie, Action for Rehabilitation from Neurological Injury. We are now in our 20th year of serving, helping stroke survivors. It's a charity as well, a charity and an institute. And we mainly deal with stroke survivors. The neurological aspect comes that we help patients with other kinds of brain injuries as well, but really our specialization is stroke. I myself am a stroke survivor, and a very successful one too. I was paralyzed down with a stroke there. You can see the neat scar there now. I had hemorrhagic stroke, and I was paralyzed down that side, of course. I have suffered very significant limitations, but worked my way through them. And this hand works just as well as this hand works now. I used strength and power, assisters to get through those, martial arts, even DJing, Mike, you know. Anyway.
Well, I look forward to seeing you doing some DJing at some point.
I'll send you a CD. It's probably rubbish by now. As far as the rehab prescriptions is concerned, well, as Mike has rightly noted, the rehab prescription has no real value if the individual with an ABI or their GP doesn't receive a copy. If both parties don't know what rehab is preferably required, then no access to services needed can be planned or implemented. There's actually an acknowledgement in my field, clinically and in the community, that the use of rehab prescriptions haven't even been explored as yet, you know. And actually, even now, senior clinical therapists around the country have only heard rumours about them being created. They're not clear on what form these would take. And I'll expand on this in a bit. Hockman, over to you.
Thank you, Tom, and thank you everyone for joining us this evening. My name is Hockman Wong. I'm a specialist brain injury solicitor. I act for people who have suffered a brain injury as a result of something going wrong, no matter what the cause. I help my clients get compensation and the things that they need. As Mike has pointed out, rehab prescriptions are a great idea. I think they are a wonderful document. It's great to have a one-stop passport to all of the key information to plan and make rehabilitation happen. It's great for patients so that they have everything in one place. They have less paperwork, they can take it with them. And this is especially the case as these are people who have suffered a serious injury. I mean, they have enough on their plates already to worry about carrying around every single discharge summary from their various specialists. Yeah. From a lawyer's point of view, a rehab prescription is also a great document. It allows people without clinical expertise to quickly assess injuries and rehabilitation needs, which is great for me. I'm a claimant solicitor, so the document would be really useful for me to agree and obtain funding for early treatment with the defendants. I think a rehab prescription as an objective document would narrow the issues between claimant and defendant solicitors, and hopefully it would give us less to argue about and help us work together better so that a claim would run smoother and faster. So yeah, a rehab prescription is a great idea. It would be a great thing. But in practice, it's not something that I've ever come across in any of my clients' records. And I've also asked my colleagues in my department, and they've also never seen a rehab prescription in their clients' records. So I think it's a missed opportunity at a really useful document that would help patients, therapists, and lawyers.
Thank you, Hockman. Sarah, do you want to have a few introductory words?
Yes, I'm Sarah Grimshaw. I'm a clinical specialist occupational therapist, currently full-time in the independent sector. But just going back to 2010 when rehabilitation prescriptions first came out, I was actually working in the NHS within a community neuro team, and it was sort of the next best thing to single assessment process. So that rehab prescription would follow that person out. It would already start to explore what issues there were physically, cognitively and psychosocially for that person, but also start to explore what that person wanted from their rehabilitation. So yeah, us working as an interdisciplinary team felt that people would benefit. We wouldn't be going out and doing the same questions, the same assessments as everybody had done in the acute sector, then coming out into the community. I left the community neuro team in 2013 and never saw a rehab prescription come out with anybody, which was quite upsetting because other sectors, so stroke teams, were getting their act together around that single assessment process, passing information on as people went through the teams, but certainly people with traumatic brain injury didn't see that. I've worked within the independent sector, firstly as a case manager, but then I've moved on back into occupational therapy. I missed doing the cliff face stuff with clients, and from 2017 I was full-time within the independent sector working for Rehabilitate Therapy. So we're a group of occupational therapists that cover the North East, North West and Yorkshire regions and the Midlands. And I knew I was coming on doing this webinar, and I was asking other associates whether they've ever seen a rehab prescription, and nobody's ever seen one. And it's such a shame because that information is so precious. We're almost being proactive rather than reactive. And just what Hockman was saying is it'd be clinically effective as well, that we know what our colleagues in the NHS has actually done, and we can hit the ground running. And it's often that people are passed through different areas of rehabilitation, and we're always asking the same questions and doing the same assessments. And no wonder we get to people and they're absolutely cheesed off because people have asked that question 6, 7 times. And nobody's considering them in that it's not client-centered. It's always the same information you're trying to get from them.
Yes.
And I think our NHS colleagues sort of start that process off, but we often get involved 12 months post accident and almost are trying to catch up with ourselves, and especially around things like leisure and productivity, which isn't considered within the NHS, and almost picking up the pieces. So people are getting to the stage of having independent practitioners involved and getting really cheesed off with us because they've lost the job, they're losing friends and family and their roles, and are at an all-time low. And I just think it would be an absolutely wonderful thing to be cost effective and clinically effective with that client moving forward. Definitely.
Well,
Thank you, Sarah. Yes, Tom, sorry.
I can back that up because I spoke with Professor Avril Drummond at the Nottingham University about rehab prescriptions for stroke survivors. And she's really well versed in the national situation and forthcoming initiatives in stroke. Now, after inquiring with colleagues for a good month or so, she drew a total blank. And after questioning to the national leads, she revealed that they don't know. So if the national leads don't know, then we can be pretty sure that nothing's going to take place anytime soon. This is a shame because it would be invaluable for a patient to know that any trainer or therapist they work with can access like a simple passport containing up-to-date info on their rehab needs.
Yeah.
It's what we've always alluded to. It's that single assessment process. It's that trust from being moved from one professional to another, and that seamless clinical effectiveness that we all strive for. And that person in the middle of it.
Yeah.
Exactly. So I think we can clearly agree, A, that it's a good idea, but B, it's not working. If this panel and others you've asked have not heard of it, and there's a note here on the chat from Emma in Yorkshire, who's a stroke survivor, she's heard of it as well. So I think without doing a sort of informal poll, we can say that it's now, I think you'll probably go as far as say it's fallen into disuse, really. It was a great idea that never materialized. If I remember rightly, in the early days, and maybe on the chat people can correct me, that the trusts, the acute trusts, were given a financial incentive for actually doing it, which is a sad reflection that somebody thought that doctors needed a financial, I don't think personally, but the trust was able to charge an extra sum for completing the rehab prescription. I'm sure that's right from memory. I say people can correct me. But as I say, it's sad that that was required. But even if that's required, that's fallen into disrepute or disrepair or whatever the word is anyway. So maybe the question is not, do we need one? It's how can we make sure it's actually done? What can we do? And I think I would say it should be the responsibility of the first rehab team in the acute hospital. But if they don't do it for whatever reason, there's nothing to stop the next team down doing it and passing it on.
The problem is higher than that, though, Mike, because if you know the top, not even the senior clinicians and academics and the stroke leads, if they're not mandating, if they're not even creating forms, that the requirement for a prescription is getting through all those in my area anyway, in stroke, they don't seem to know who's responsible for writing their performance. Performers, and if there's stage that hasn't been achieved, no one in the hospital knows who's responsible for filling them in. So it's not even worth
it's just not being done.
No.
They even created a pro forma. That's the upsetting thing. The British Society of Rehab Medicine actually created a pro forma to make it easier.
Yeah, it's a while since I did one, but not because I can't be bothered anymore, because I'm not in that field anymore, but nevertheless, it's not difficult. If you know the person, you know what their needs are, putting this down, all we're asking is for people to put it down on a paper, and the pro forma is there to do it. And the question here from Anonymous, why do you think people don't use the rehab prescription more widely? Good question. I mean, what is stopping people filling this in? Is it ignorance? Is it time? Is it not perceiving the need because it starts at the acute sector and they don't see the follow through into the community? What is it, do you think, that's actually stopping this working?
I think it's time. I still chat.
Have you ever seen one though? Because it's an interesting one. Have you ever seen one? In stroke, we haven't seen it. If we haven't seen it, nobody.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah, I mean, it is. I think it's still available on the BSRM website as a pro forma. I have seen in the early days, going back a decade now, I did see some when people came to our post-acute rehab facility in Birmingham, Hunters Moor. Perhaps less than 10%. I couldn't think of a number, but certainly less than 10% came with it. And now it seems that number, that 10%, is probably down to near 0%. So it has fallen into disuse.
And also, acute's become very acute. It's about shifting people through the process. So have our colleagues in the NHS acute system got the time to fill them in?
Well, yeah, they might not, but I think it's a pretty poor excuse if they don't, because it's part of what they should be doing for their patients, basically. Sorry, Hockman, I cut you off.
I was going to say that in preparation for this webinar, I did have a look at the pro forma, and it doesn't look very onerous.
No, it's not.
I wanted to ask Mike and Sarah, as two clinicians who have been there at the coalface. I mean, how much time extra time would it take to fit it in? Is it that difficult?
No. It shouldn't be, because you're having MDT meetings, you're working as an MDT, so it should be part of that discharge pro forma that is filled in and passed on.
And presumably in an acute setting, these are just basic facts that are known and will be hopefully recorded in the patient's notes anyway. So it's simply a matter of extracting that from the notes. Let's be generous and say it will take half an hour. Generous. I would have thought it could take less than that once you're used to it, 20 minutes. So it's not okay, that adds up if you're a busy unit, I realize that, but it's so important for that person to have that as they go through the rehab journey, not just of the coming months, of the coming years, that it's, 20 minutes of your time to do it seems to me to be very little.
Seems to be even more important now, well, due to the pandemic, and well, in my area, it's these patients have gone without, and some have had very little therapy, and the means to provide private support hadn't really been available to many. Yes. So a rehab prescription would be a reasonably good idea to guide that independent therapist or training, that can be taken on down the route.
There's a question from an Anonymous again here. What is the blockage between the consultant rehab medicine producing the prescription and the GP receiving it? Well, one blockage is they don't write it in the first place. But that was an issue, again, a few years ago, and I shouldn't think it has changed, that summary of prescriptions were done, but they weren't given to the person, the patient, they were given to the GP. And with great respect to GP colleagues, some of whom are probably on this call, that's fine, but it may just go in the patient's notes and not go to the team that's actually looking after them. And my view, and I think the original intention, was that this should be given to the person, given to the patient, or if not appropriate, to their family members. So they hold it. After all, they're the person that's in the center of the care, and all the therapists and the doctors and the psychologists come to see them. And why don't they hold their own prescription? Of course, it's the logical thing to do. Then it wouldn't get lost in a GP set of notes.
I've got an anonymous attendee who thinks that it's a decent question. I think it's all a bit harsh, as it's just from where you are. There's some regions who always fill in rehab prescriptions.
Well, I'm pleased to hear it, but I don't know which region that is. But,
well, yeah, I mean, we've had people scouting at my request, England, Scotland, Northern Ireland, Wales, for any signs, and this is just stroke. So yes, it's just one part, but it is a big part of ABI. and that nobody knows about anything going on. These are the senior clinicians and senior academics, you know. They are the ones who would need to be writing these, and
well, let's take that point, Dom, and let's assume that there are some units that are doing it very well and good. Is there any feedback from those people who work in such units to say how is it actually helpful in practice? Because we seem as a panel to be, and some of the attendees here seem to be saying, well, we've never seen one or heard of one. So if it is there and it is working, let's hear how it is working. If anyone wants to type an answer to that, perhaps the person who said we're being too harsh. I hate to think I'm being too harsh. It's not like me at all. I'm very harsh.
Yeah. Oh, the rehab prescription is still very much used in trauma services. We provide to the patient and the GP on discharge home and onto the next provider, rehab services, GP and patient, as appropriate on transfer from acute centre. That's good. Here's Emma Reed Chalmers, and she's a very well-informed stroke survivor. She says, I don't think it's about time. I don't think it's about time. I think it's, okay.
All right, I don't think it's about, shall I read it out? People can see this. I don't think it's about accountability and transparency. Sorry, I don't think it's about time. I think it is about accountability and transparency. So much isn't done properly and isn't client-centered. You assume the medical notes are being properly kept. Mine aren't, etc. So perhaps, Hockman, I can ask you, some people are saying on the chat here that people don't want to be held accountable. If they put something down, let's say physiotherapy. You need physiotherapy 2 hours every day, make up a number, and it's only delivered 1 hour a day. Is there any sort of legal comeback to that? My rehab prescription says I need 2 hours, and you only give me 1 hour. That's not good enough. Because that might people be scared of that sort of accountability and having a lawyer's letter saying you're not delivering the rehab prescription? Is that an issue that we need to address?
I think to think that people would think like that would be quite a sad reflection of the litigious culture that we have. I really hope that people don't take such a defensive position. I wouldn't think that people would have to be afraid of putting what they think is needed, because everyone should realize that the reality of resources is taken into account. And I don't think there would be that greater danger of receiving a letter from a lawyer saying that they've been negligent for not providing what's in the rehabilitation prescription.
Good, but it could be a useful document, even if it's not got the force of law behind it.
Yes.
It could be very helpful for the person who says, I need 2 hours of physiotherapy. They say, wait a minute, you're only giving me 1 hour. It says here 2, and that could be, I can see it being quite a useful document in the hands of that person and their family to clout round the head of the therapist. I know they haven't got the time, I know this, but then there can be a proper, sensible adult intellectual debate saying, I'm really sorry, I only have a time to deliver an hour of physiotherapy. Yeah, I think it could be just a very useful tool for people to discuss it. Sorry, Tom.
No, not at all.
Yeah, when we do our initial assessments, we have to project what we feel as a therapist that we're going to do with that client. So again, it would be really useful to have that from colleagues as a suggestion, because they know the best. I'm going in new to that person, meeting them for that very first time, and just to have that information just would be really useful.
And as you said, Sarah, because it helps, it stops multiple assessments. There's nothing more depressing, I'd imagine, than saying going to a new therapist and they're starting all over again as though they're not talked to the previous one or the previous team. That is, obviously you will need to make your own assessment at some point, but having something to guide you as to what's gone on before could be really useful. So,
and I think from case managers to do their initial needs assessments, because it's not just rehab prescriptions, it's getting any medical information from the hospitals. I think Nicola Owen said that it is not easy to obtain. And I'm just thinking of my psychology colleagues who do standardized assessments and finding it really difficult to know what to do because they can't get that information, and it's whether they're invalidating any assessment information going forward.
Indeed. I mean, I work in the community. We don't see any of this stuff that maybe will be generated clinically. We don't see it when it comes to working with the patients. But it seems a really obvious thing. If it can be kept up to date by a therapist working with patients as they move further away from the incident, it can include the notes then of other assistant agencies, such as specialised clinics, and maybe those like applying FES or Botox, or intensive weeks working with CIMT or something like that.
Let's look at that top question. Well, I think it is the big question of the evening, in a sense. How can we educate rehab professionals about the importance of taking control of a specialist rehab prescription at the acute stage? I mean, everyone agrees this is a good thing, and no doubt people in the acute stage will think it's a good thing as well. And I think anyone seriously can doubt it. But how can we educate people? What should we do? I mean, things like this tonight are a start. Should it be a particular body? Should it be the BSRM that was partly instrumental in initiating it in the first place? Not totally, but partly. Should they write letters to the acute hospitals and all the consultants in rehab medicine? Do they need reminding about it? How do we actually go about making sure this actually happens? What can we do? Let's assume it's nice to hear that it's working in some parts of the country. If it is, that's great. Let's assume it's not working in most parts of the country. What can we actually do? Who should do it? And how can we say, get on with this, for heaven's sake, it's not difficult?
Can I answer this one, Mike?
Yeah.
I think in specialisms, maybe even wider specialisms, the great and the good should get together and discuss exactly what we mean by rehab prescription. So I don't think that the terms are particularly useful. Some may say they're really useful, but tying down exactly what they mean may be a really good idea. Then mandate the creations and the use of the statutory performer. So I know people can find it, but I don't think people generally know where to find it or that it's available.
Yes.
You know, then so that can be moved on down the line.
It would be interesting to hear from any medical professionals in the audience how they would react if it was mandated. You know, if you had to. I mean, would they be put off by that, or would they comply? It'd be really interesting to get that a clinical coalface point of view. Yeah.
Generally, mandating to doctors doesn't usually work very well. Awkward bunch, aren't we? Tell us what to do and we do the opposite. I shouldn't criticize my own profession, should I, publicly? But why not? I think that's generally true. I think, and again, people put on the chat, it was mandated at first. I'm sure it was mandated at first, but it obviously clearly hasn't been since. So my suggestion, and feel free to argue with it, is that a body that, as we're talking about, let's talk about the specialist prescription, which needs to be completed by a consultant. Otherwise, we're having to address it across a whole panoply of therapy and rehabilitation professionals. If it's got to be completed by a consultant, why doesn't the British Society of Rehab Medicine write to all their consultants, and it's mainly their consultants that are involved in rehabilitation, not exclusively, but mainly, and say, don't forget this, here's the template in case you've forgotten about it, fill it in. So that's
what teeth does it have? I mean, it does need to have some teeth, you know?
I don't think it has any teeth in the sense of, I think it's just a helpful guide. I think it doesn't have formalized teeth that we've heard from Hockman. It's not it can't be perhaps pushed legally. But I think it's just a very useful and sensible document. There's something here from Mohammed. Hi, we found the main issue is implementation of the rehab prescription and the carry of any recommendations in the community and getting feedback at the clinic follow-ups. Yeah, it's implementing and doing it. But as we said, I don't think we should not put in the prescription what is needed, all because it might not be available. That's a fundamental thing. We never know what services we're missing unless we say what's needed and then can compare what's needed with what's available. So if some people aren't writing it down because they say, well, there's no point me putting 2 hours of physiotherapy example. There's no point putting that down because there's nowhere they're going to get it. That's not a reason not to put it down. In fact, I think it's a reason to put it down.
Yes. Yes, I mean, there may be alternative means to find treatment. It could be private health insurance, or maybe if there's a legal claim, and just because, yeah, there could be other means to get that treatment.
Some treatment doesn't have to be a very high price. You know, we've got Peter Bocconi, who's come in on the chat saying, why would GPs not cooperate with institutes like Arnie?
Yeah.
PT and OT. Peter is one of the Arnie Institute, he's a senior trainer, institute trainer.
Right.
And he's got a good point, because it could be 55 pounds per hour session, you know. It's not, yes, that might be one time per week, but that may not be a bank buster for people, you know.
Yeah, yeah.
So to know that that's carrying on through the longer term, being recorded, and having somebody to record that all the way from clinic right out in the community, that's good stuff.
The top question is, can someone explain how a patient can advocate for getting that prescription? Would they need to go via a case manager, or can anyone request one? I would suggest anyone can request one. If you're a patient or a family member of a patient who hasn't got one, I would suggest go and demand one to whoever that is, whether that be the case manager or through to the consultant or through to a senior therapist or whatever it is. So I think this is a good idea. I want one so I can take it through my journey with me. So I'm advocating for patient revolution. Take charge. Don't sit back.
I think there's power in that as well, because people listen to patients and clients.
Yeah, yeah.
And what their journey is, and whether they've fallen through the net, and what can be done differently.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. And the patients could find a copy of the pro forma and then demand.
Fill this in. I'm not leaving till you fill it in.
Yeah.
Yeah, and actually, Hockman, definitely in litigation, we do send update reports and do team goals and client goals, but maybe we should write it within the rehab prescription pro forma. Maybe we should learn something as well, not just leave it to the acute sector. That
yes, exactly. Let's not all blame the acute sector, which is nice to do.
That's right.
But you know, if it's not done with the acute sector for whatever reason, resources or anything else, the next one down the rung, as it were, if it's not done, do it.
Yeah.
So I think we all have a responsibility, including the patient, I have to say, let's do this together, and it will be helpful in the long term for you. And that's Nicola's question at the top there. So why paperwork in general isn't easy to obtain from the hospital? Well, that's true. But if you do this one piece of paper, you won't need to obtain any more from the hospital because you've got it already. It's here in your hand. I think it should be held by the patient, personally, not held by a therapist or the GP or whatever, when it might be filed and frankly forgotten or not used when they move on.
There's a maintenance aspect to all this, though, isn't there, Mike? It's got to be updated all the time, I think.
Exactly. Yeah. It's a live document, isn't it? Must be.
Or minus.
Yeah. So let's look at the next question. Given the lack of use, this is something to be raised through the peer leadership network within NHS, which is centered around lived experience improving NHS for everyone. That's something I'm not. I'm a little bit out of the NHS these days. What someone can explain that to me? Can any of the panel say what the peer leadership network is? That a suitable forum for raising this issue? Silence. People don't know about the peer leadership network, clearly. So,
is that something for clients and patients to raise issues? And
I honestly don't know. So if anyone does know, we'll come back to that point maybe. If anyone wants to, anyone out there who's more educated than I am, certainly about peer leadership networks, drop us a quick note into the chat room and we'll you can educate us. Do the panel think if we all had one agreed national document, there will be increased use? Well, in a sense, we have got an agreed national document, the original rehab prescription. So sadly, I think the answer to the question is no, there wouldn't be increased use because we've got one, it isn't being used to any significant extent. But yeah, I mean, having an agreed national document is really important, but there is one there.
I think it's 11 years on and nobody really talking about it. That's the thing, Mike, isn't it?
Yeah.
So it needs a lot more conversation, talk about it from much more senior people in the fields.
Well, there's somebody here confirming what I said earlier, that there are financial incentives in using the RP with the acute trust receive funding per patient. I'm sure that was right. Thank you, PMB, for confirming that. So despite financial incentives, it's still not being used. So what do we do? Do we increase the I don't know how much financial incentive there is, but maybe we should increase it. But it's a sad reflection on everybody, frankly. The next one at the top is people want to comply, but the reality is that compliance could occur only comply with more resources. The system is overstretched. I think we all agree with that, but there's no slack in the system to give more work to doctors or other MDT members in hospitals. Yeah, I take the point, and we all know the NHS generally is overstretched, particularly around COVID. Obviously, we all know that. But yeah, I think it comes back to that point we said earlier. Let's not, if there's people not putting things down because they know it won't be delivered, I don't think that's a reason not to put it down. Otherwise, we'll never get those resources that we're arguing for, and people still should argue for. So I would differ with that point. I think we should put down what we as professionals really think is needed for that individual, regardless, even if we know for certain it's not going to be delivered, like speech therapy, for example. If we know in that particular patch of the community they're not going to get speech therapy, there's not a reason not to put it down, I don't think. As long as it's just a sensible discussion with the patient, I'm going to put this down, but I think you're going to struggle to get it. And if you treat the patient like you want to be treated yourself, you know, just be honest.
Right. I think if it isn't initiated at the acute, really acute level, then there's nothing to move on. We just desperately need that in the community.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we're just getting the same things all over again, just as Sarah said earlier on. It's not difficult for us to get, but it does make life harder for the stroke survivors and the other survivors who really want assistance now without having to collect data from the GPs. They're finding it hard to give data at the moment. They're charging £30, 40, 50 pounds, some of them. Some of them are just not doing it at all. So, I mean, that's just for GP's fit note exercise.
Let's look at these other questions. I think we've addressed Peter's one, why would GPs not cooperate? I think we've dealt with that one. GPs should cooperate. Mohammed said it should have the same status as completing the discharge summary at discharge. Absolutely. Well, everyone does get a discharge summary. So, you know, some piece of paper is being completed. You don't leave hospital without a discharge summary being sent to the GP. And it's not much more of a step. It could be used as the discharge summary. And just photocopy that to the GP and give the other copy to the patients. The appropriate individual trust can mandate it. Yes, they can. So that's one thing we can do. Emma Reed Chalmers, it is a, I think this is the LIVE scheme we mentioned earlier. It's a scheme for those of us with lived experience to engage and involve the NHS. It's a free accredited course. Since I am one, I will reflect back. Thank you, Emma. I didn't know that.
Emma's a star. We like Emma.
Yeah.
Emma's disappeared quickly. Kate's booting them out very fast when we ask them. What have we got next? PMB, given the increased use of the NHS app following the pandemic, surely the rehab prescription could be made available for patients on that, so there could be a power to request the recommended treatment via their GP. That's a great idea, PMB. You know, these days, I think 11 years ago, maybe apps weren't so widely used and it was a piece of paper that followed the person around or meant to. It would be a lovely idea to put that in the part of the NHS app or there's a rehab prescription app. It's not difficult to do that. And then you really would have it, and you can share it and email it to people. And, you know, then
we could add to it, definitely.
You can add to it online, and it'd be a live, easily completed document, rather than risk having a bit of paper floating off somewhere. So that's a great idea. Yeah.
Kate would like to answer this question live. Maybe
that means us, Tom. That's a note from Kate to us that we need to answer it live, not Kate. Emma, again, my community physio wouldn't be accountable at all. It would be a brilliant document to raise standards of provision within the system. I think that's absolutely right, Emma. I think we all would agree with that. Emma, you're doing a lot of the talking here, which is great. That's not a criticism. It's good to see us interacting. So also the document ensures therapists stayed up to date as the range of professionals involved would raise everyone's ideas. Absolutely right again. That'd be a really good idea. Yeah.
I agree with you, Emma.
And the next one from Emma is peer leadership also dovetails with personalised healthcare budgets, which have been available since 2019, and legislative right. Seems to me that this will work well with it, as PHB gives client the funds along with rehab prescription, would endorse clients being able to choose and access what they need and is recommended for them. Again, absolutely good point, Emma. Thank you.
I'd like to know, Emma, about funds given with this scheme. How much is given? Is it dependent on the seriousness of case or requirement for need? What is it?
Yeah, it was developed around people having healthcare budgets for what they needed within health and social care. So it's individualised, so they get what they need at the right time. So yes, it would fit really well into personal healthcare budgets. Okay,
good. Good, thank you. I think we've answered the top one, Kate, as well. Any other questions before we sort of try and bring this to conclusion? We've got 8 or 9 minutes if we need it. For the moment, well, let's have a think. I think what we've discussed is A, that it's a great idea, or was a great idea 10 years ago. It still is a great idea. It's not being followed through at the moment, generally speaking, although we heard that perhaps 1 or 2 parts of the country are doing this, which is good. We all think everyone has a responsibility to complete it. I think we thought but it's not working even if it's mandated. So I think we thought that maybe some of the influential bodies, perhaps like the British Society of Rehab Medicine or others, could write to the consultants to say, don't forget the rehab prescription, here's a pro forma, please fill it in and make sure you do, and remind people what the incentives are, and to state the obvious about how it will be useful for the patient to be. And maybe we all need to take responsibility. You know, maybe if I'll pick on Tom, because I haven't picked on him for a while, maybe when you see a patient through Arnie, you should say, Tom, where's your rehab prescription? And if it's not there, do one. And likewise, any, you know, and Sarah the same, or Hockman, when you see someone from a legal point of view, you say, where's the rehab prescription? And write out to say, you know, people don't like letters from lawyers, do they? They might actually do it if you write. So maybe we should give you the job of writing to every consultant in the country saying you've got to complete this. But I think it's a responsibility of all of us to make sure, if we think it's a good idea, to make sure it actually happens, and persuade at any stage, if it's not there, let's do it. And I would include the NRC clinical practice people there, because those consultants in NRC clinical practice, when that gets properly going, will be seeing the patients the long term. Maybe we should be part of our NRC medical experts clinical practice guidance, if you like, to our doctors. You must have a rehab prescription. I know Ed's on the call here.
Mike, there is one point about this, which is the GDPR point about information sharing. So I know I can write to some of my senior clinical colleagues and ask them, well, did you see this patient in your institute? So, for instance, Professor Nick Ward at the Queen Square, he would tell me, yes, we did, but we can't, of course, discuss exactly what was done with him or her. You see what I mean? So it would be, it's still trying to get information directly from the patient and then backing up with little bits from their GP, you know. and some
Yeah.
that
As
have been-
GT, surely though, I mean, Hockham can advise us here, is probably, you know, surely if the patient is given permission for this information to be circulated, that's all right. You don't have to worry about GDPR, do we, in those circumstances?
That's correct. You can give authority to anyone to share information with someone else.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, that could be something else people are hiding behind. We've got 3 more questions here, so let's have a look at them because we've got another 6 minutes. There's a whole scheme, a set of criteria set out in legislation, but huge problem, local CCG deciding to impose local criteria and undermining it. Yep. Did it get lost in the 2012 legislation, so time resurrected under, is it time for it to be resurrected? I think that means under new legislation. I don't think it was ever legislation, Emma. It was a good idea supported by the clinical group I mentioned earlier and the BSRM, but I don't think it was ever legislative. Although, having said that, someone must have mandated it. If it was mandated, maybe we should, BSRM or some influential body should write to Stephen Powis and remind him. He could then write out as medical director of the NHS to the NHS saying, don't forget you should be completing the rehab prescription. That's another avenue. If it comes from on high, people tend to take more note of it, perhaps.
Mike, maybe you're still on high.
No, I'm not on high. Well, I'm just high these days. What else have we got? Mohammed, the CCG should highlight to the trust the rehab prescription is needed at discharge and completion of obligatory discharge information. I agree. I think we agree with that, Mohammed. The trust would then have to come back to the CCG with a formal answer. Absolutely. That was another way to do it. And Ed, here it is. NRC medical expert consultants should be including an RP in their medical legal reports and also in providing clinical practice service. I agree with that, Ed. And maybe we should be setting an example in our organization just to make sure that everyone we deal with has a rehab prescription. If they don't do one, maybe that's something we could lead on.
We'll be bringing it up with our associates, definitely.
Yeah, good. Yes, and we are doing, Ed. Thank you. Excellent. Good. Well, I think.
So, Mike, just to one point,
yes.
You said that, but do you mean at any point during when the patient comes into one in the community level?
Yes.
Years on.
Why not?
Why? Fair play.
No reason, is there?
No.
If they haven't had one for the previous 2 years, then let's, if it's relevant, do one then. So I think let's all embrace that, but let's also work with those senior colleagues who may have some influence, like the BSRM, and I'll write to Stephen Powis. So I think the BSRM needs to step back up to the plate. Any final? We're going to finish on time. We've got 3 minutes. Any final comments from the panel, Sarah? Anything from you?
I think it's about me taking it away and promoting the rehab prescription within the work that I do and bringing that forward, that our MDTs that we work with is that the main document, yes, we send in goals and update reports and things, but yeah, it's about establishing the rehab prescription at any point. And I think that's definitely what I will take away from that.
Great, thank you. Tom, anything final comment from you?
I agree with that. I love that, Sarah, that you make the point that taking it on at any level and creating a really reasonably decent document, but calling it a rehab prescription is a good idea. But I still do say there's a slight problem with terms where prescription isn't necessarily the right thing to be called.
Yes, it's not quite the right term, is it, Tom?
What it should be called.
Yes.
No, so it's not.
Yeah.
Something to think about.
Hockman, any last points from you?
Just echoing everyone else that yes, I think we should empower everyone to help bring it along, patients, lawyers, therapists, very useful.
Well, let's make sure it works, and let's finish on that. And Ed has just dropped me a phone. Ed, being the director of NRC, says every NRC doctor will do a rehab prescription and hang all their work off this in conjunction with case managers. So that's good. Let's NRC set an example for this, and everyone else at the same time. So I'm going to stop then because it's 18:59. I don't often finish exactly on time. That's more by luck than judgment, I think. So thank you all for being there. We've had a good debate. We know what to do. What we need to do is do this again in a year's time and reconvene and see if actually what we've said and done here has made a blind bit of difference. I hope it is, and because I think it's a really useful document. And thank you all for taking part in this. Hopefully we'll do some more NRC and NR Times webinars. Can I just thank the panelists? Can I thank Kate and NRC medical experts and NR Times for sorting this out and supporting it, and Kate for doing a lot of the work behind the scenes. And for that, it's exactly 7 o'clock. And I wish you all a good evening.